All right, so I think we're ready to start.
Yeah.
I'd like to call to order the January 7th, 2025 school committee meeting. And I'm not sure if you can hear us online. So if there's any, we'll start with any comment for anyone in person today. All right. And
Can someone who might be watching at home or listening at home, Alba, can you tell us if you can hear us?
I can unmute. I'll unmute them, and if you speak, I can speak.
Yeah, it works. Okay. All right.
All right, I know the meeting has been open for a bit and there's no public comment in the chat, so we can move on and kick off our business meeting. So to start off, we have our warrants 1037 through 1041 and the minutes from December 11th, 2024. If I could have a motion to accept.
So moved.
Second. Thank you. Any questions or I believe everyone's starting the 11th, right? So no reason to split things up. All right, so all those in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you. Moving on, we do have the MSBA feasibility agreement. Did everyone have a chance to review, or does anyone have any general questions?
Just one general.
Sure.
Is this a form agreement that's provided to us by MSBA or is it drafted with our council?
The MSBA.
Yeah, so the feasibility agreement is provided to us by MSBA along with the scope of work. So it's their standard. There is a secondary letter in there, that's letter from council that just affirms that you are the authorizing body for signing into that agreement.
Although I will say the appendices are specific to us, so if we didn't want the those. It says what options we agree to explore, so.
What's the scope?
That's the scope of the work. And the Essex SBCs, the school building committee, monitored the scope, kicked it back, asked questions, it came back and agreed to that scope of work.
All right, then I'll accept the motion. All right, Teresa, thank you. Second.
Second.
Thank you, Kate. Any discussion?
Great step forward. I think it's very. For the purposes of anybody who has not read the scope of our work, do you think that it's, I think probably we should share with people what
Sure.
options they're looking at. So they're looking at town of Essex grade K through 3, town of Essex grade K through 5, and district wide K through 5.
That is correct.
People have had some, I've heard some questions about that, so I think that it's worth clarifying that all of those things are being looked into.
Yep. But we'll be analyzing a couple of different options as we look at the process.
I think that's great because I think it's also going to allow us, when a decision is reached, to be able to feel confident that we've explored the alternatives. And I think that's going to be an important part of creating buy-in in the final response.
Right. And being, I think, for our own understanding and our ability to explain that, if we talk about it, it's valuable. Exciting.
And did you want to put up anything on this or?
We don't have the TV.
Yeah, I just did not.
No, all the documents are posted, are public documents, and they're posted online on the Essex SBC page. So there's a running record there of everything that we're agreeing to. And then all of the previous SBC meetings are also posted on 1623. So the whole discussion.
All right, excellent. So with that, we'll take a vote. All those in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you. And then, next on the agenda, do you have a report tonight? Good, all right, great.
Hello, I hope everyone's having a good week there. There's not a whole ton going on with the student body right now. I have 3 things that I wanted to talk about. The first is just that about the library. I feel like at the beginning, there was a lot of negative discourse with the students about the library, but honestly, since Ms. Baglioni has come in and stepped in, that has like completely changed. She's only been here for a few weeks, but I feel like she really has like a very special and unique connection with the students, and she's done still the lovely lights that are in here now. She's done a lot to make this like a really great space. I feel like people definitely appreciate that and just are talking about how great that is. The second thing that I want to talk about briefly is just a bit of, I guess, like confusion or just questions about school safety, maybe like the locking doors policy in the morning and then the new Raptor system. And also that this lock is now not in view of the door. I hear people talk about that a lot and how that whole system is, what the intention of it is. I guess that is another thing I hear a lot about. And then the third thing is that I know is voting soon on the arts, on making an arts requirement for high school. So people are definitely talking about that. And all honestly, I don't think I've talked to any students who were in favor of an arts requirement. But I think that's because most of the people feel that if you're like a super person, that person's really into like STEM or something like that, that maybe more, if you're not really an artistic person, people don't feel like you should be forced to take an art class if you aren't going to use it in your future. But that's all.
Can you explain more about the safety?
Yeah.
issue? Like,
No, there's no
for
issue.
people who aren't in the.
Sorry.
No, sorry, I shouldn't have phrased it that way. The conversation that's happening about the new, locked door system, for those of us who aren't in the building and can't picture what that is.
So I guess basically it is just that when kids are coming to school in the morning, the front doors are always locked. So when you're trying to enter the school building, the door would be locked and you have to ring in or wait for a teacher with a pass to come by because there's not always someone attending the doorbell. So sometimes you'll ring and then you have to wait until the teacher comes by with their pass. But I guess the only thing I hear about that is that like students don't really understand the purpose because it doesn't feel like anyone's really being like screened, if that makes sense. Because once a teacher unlocks the door, then like 25 kids who've been waiting there will come in. So I think there's just confusion about what the purpose of that is, especially since apparently there's a new Raptor system being introduced, which I don't know what's going on with that. And especially since Miss Locke's office or desk was moved to be out of view of the front door, so she can't see who's coming in anymore. So I think people are just confused as to what like the intent of policy about locking the door in the morning is, if that makes sense.
That's great.
Sorry, that was kind of confused.
So when you
Not
say
confusing
locked
at all.
in the morning, it's always locked when I come here. Are you saying before school hours it's locked, or
No, like
how is it different than it used to be? Is it like
Like
if I
during
come
school.
to drop something off, the door is locked?
yeah, I'm saying like during, say from like 7:20 to like 7.
Okay, when students
when
are
people
arriving.
really like everyone's coming in, the door's locked during that period of
And
time.
it didn't used to be.
It has been for, I believe last year it was like this too, but before that it was.
Okay.
It has definitely not been like this the whole time I've been in high school.
Starting this Monday, you noticed a change or prior to the break?
A change in,
The accessibility of the front door. Because
oh,
the general policy had been open during general arrival and dismissal and then locked at 7:45.
I would say that for the past like 2 years, it's definitely always been locked during when students are headed to school.
But students are just bringing it up now. I think we're trying to
No,
understand, like,
no.
is there something that's changed?
Sorry, so this has been a conversation that I've been hearing for a long time.
Okay.
People are definitely frustrated with that, they sometimes have to wait outside school to come in. I think the reason I brought it up tonight is because people are talking about it more right now because Miss Locke's office was moved and because the Raptor system's introduced.
Front door or viewing?
So the front door is always locked and then the door on the side is locked unless, Mr. Roy and Mr. Water are out there, which usually they go out there about 7:30, 7:35-ish. So if you arrive before then you go in the front.
I feel like we don't have all the information we need to process on this, so if we can put this on this advisory, let's put this on the advisory agenda, because people will need help us understand their thinking or scoring.
Yeah.
Can I ask you to clarify the arts conversation? Because as far as I recall, the only hint of it that we've had is from you. So I'm wondering how the conversation is propagating within the school when it hasn't been a kind of an administrative conversation yet.
So, I think other students are definitely hearing that from teachers in the school, mostly. That is where I've been hearing it from.
Certain classes.
Yes, or in like free blocks or blue blocks or just a pass.
So the process
We
of,
heard about it.
yes, the process of program of studies development is Julie working with her department chairs, teacher groups, school council, students. So there's ongoing discussion about what maybe, I'll get the proposal probably at the beginning of next week. Heather, just to try and craft what the what the recommendation is going to be for next year or what they want to go.
Okay.
So I'm anticipating we're going to get a proposal for an arts requirement, but it's not formalized yet. But this is the part of the process of if you want to involve people in the conversation and take feedback as you go, there will be a conversation before there's formal.
Yeah, I wouldn't have expected us to hear about it until our next meeting. We are brought the program of studies in.
And she'll
Ask
be here to explain
consider
why now
different
or
things.
what it might look like. Yep. So stay tuned.
Oh, sorry, I forgot to add one thing about the doors, is that Miss Locke used to hold it in. That's also why it's a conversation. Because, yeah,
That's why they were.
that's,
That's kind of the open concept. That's when I don't want to speak for them, but when the team is out, or a portion of the team is out to receive in the morning, that's when the doors are more liberally open. There's nobody there.
Right.
They're going to auto lock.
yes.
Yeah. It's a good conversation to have.
As far as the new Raptor system, I got an email just talking about what that was, but it's really just a system for visitors. So we're now taking photo IDs and anyone that comes to the building that's a visitor will now have like a picture of their photo ID taken and then a visitor's pass, so people can be identified, so cuts down on the amount of possible, unauthorized bulk in the building.
And there are options for people who do not have a driver's license or.
Yeah.
It's been operating at the elementary schools for a few months now. It's just been a staged implementation. Memorial School was the first to go to give feedback. We had some glitches with some of the technology, the kiosk, how we were to set up the kiosks. So they launched.
I noticed that the system for having visited both elementary schools, the system to be screened at Essex is different. There's no kiosk. Is the goal to eventually have a kiosk at every school?
So, yes, so some of the obstacles are with the facility design. Memorial
there's
School
no
was
foyer.
designed to
Yeah.
have a containment space where we could put the kiosk
Yeah.
and it can be monitored, where it's a little bit more challenging than the other buildings to retrofit. But with Raptor, if you've been to other schools or other office buildings, it just basically will do a quick background check on anybody who enters the building and create an entry and exit list, so we will always know who has been here. It alerts the principal, Michelle, and myself if there's any concerns.
Thank you. As far as reports, I don't have a chairman's report except to say Happy New Year, everyone. And I don't believe any of our subcommittees met except maybe the finance committee met today. But I'm not sure if there's a specific report.
I think we are going to touch base in the workshop section. So I think it will be, so we discussed about the budget calendar and we recommend Pam to marry the budget calendar and the school committee calendar because that right now is not synced up on the agenda. So if we were to put the calendar today, we will be moving to something that is not synced up. We also discussed about the budget process over the next few weeks or months, what support the finance subcommittee can provide, and that's in the workshop session that we can discuss.
We'll talk a lot about it when we get to the conversation.
All right. So then before our workshop, I think I didn't receive any feedback. I know Tracy sent a note pretty late today. Yep. So I think the best order of business would be to see if we can close out our draft of the reserve policy that we've been working on, and then move on to the budget part of our agenda, and then finish up with the subcommittee part of the agenda, subcommittee charges. So with that, I'm wondering where we stand with that policy, and if there's been any changes or updates to what we had.
So the policy committee has not met since we received feedback on that policy. So I'm confused about what we're.
Well, did we?
We were getting the clean copy. Yeah, right. We left it there and was going to put together.
Basically, what I'd like to do is try to close this out and take a vote on, what our discussions have been around the reserve policy. If, there's someone that feels strongly that we're not able to do that tonight, then we can skip that. But
I don't think that it's
Have a vote on the agenda.
we don't have a vote on the agenda.
But we could close out and we could take some straw poll votes about,
So that we can clean it
are we
up.
going to leave it at 8%?
Right.
Yes. Are we going to take out all references to, we said all references to OPEB should come out. So kind of, let's make the master list. Okay, so I think if we could go through the points that need a decision.
Yep.
Even though you don't formally vote to approve the policy, you could take straw poll votes to direct the committee, the subcommittee to revise it with those things in mind. So next time we come back, we're not starting again with, so how do we feel about? I think we repeat a little bit of the conversation.
Yeah.
So if we could just kind of go through. Yeah.
Sorry to cut you off. I just, there's two policies that are included in your PDF, and we just want to confirm that we're all looking at the same one. So there's the draft policy that's included from my PDF that starts on page 23. And then there's a draft policy that says at the top of it that it's the Triton template that's included in page 27.
So the one that doesn't say Triton template
Yeah.
is the one we have been working on prior to the introduction of the Triton concept, which had the 8%. Which seemed to be almost to the finish line before we started think about it again using the Triton model. So that's why the two are there. So one is your policy first read approval. One is the other proposal that we decided to go forward with. I just put them in for points of reference.
Can I ask the clean version from template? There's some color coding. What's the red? What's the blue again?
Let me pull my version up, or let me pull that version instead.
So go to page 22. So there's actually
Is there a third?
no, but I think stuck in between it is the MSBA letter.
Yes.
So I think it may be first people off, but so the policies are divided by a letter which isn't relevant to this conversation.
What page?
The training template starts at page 27 of the 83 page PDF.
So, okay, so which one are we looking at? Are we looking at the non-Triton version or the Triton version?
The Triton version.
Not the one I reviewed.
So the treasurer has had questions about the red and the blue. If they already cleaned up, what are they?
Those are quite, I think that those were the discussion points.
But why they come? What is it? Is there a special meeting?
I'm trying to find the, oh,
And there are even some numbers highlighting yellow.
so the yellow highlights were the discussion points, were the things we wanted to, yeah.
How about the red and blue?
Red is stabilization, blue is OPEB.
But
think that's-
you already incorporated changes. Is that is? what
No,
this is?
I've done nothing to this. I would like to come out of here today knowing what stays, what goes, and what percentages you want.
So didn't we already do that?
I thought we had talked about that and maybe maybe I misremembered, Richie. Tell me, we're at least aligned. What I thought we had talked about was keeping the 8. I thought we had talked about letting go of the conversation about stabilization, the red stuff, generally speaking, but keeping OPEB. That's what I'm remembering, and I'm trying to find it in my notes, but the idea about stabilization was more of a strategy conversation rather than a policy conversation. That was the clean copy that I'm remembering to,
That's
That we were gonna-
that's the gist of what I.
Okay.
So
Then there was also the question of making sure that the subtotals in each category, or the recommended percentages in each category add up to 8.
that's right.
So you're going to use the Triton template, decision 1. You're going to include 8%,
Keep the 8.
decision 2.
yes.
You're going to strike the red. Going back to excess and deficiency, you're keeping at least 3%.
I don't think we had decided
Yeah.
that.
Right, we hadn't come to a
Put a
decision
pin
on
in it,
that.
we'll come back. So
Yeah.
8%, yes. Red, struck, blue.
But we were going to keep blue at least to come back for a second read. For what I've got here is that 3% was the only thing left dangling. And that was a question that goes with Jake's is, do all the pieces align internally?
But I think one of the questions, I could be wrong, it's been a while. But we also talked about other categories that maybe we should use this opportunity to find here. Like some other revolving funds, for example, the athletic ones keep coming up. The other revolving funds that previously we treated as reserve or semi-reserve.
But I think we have agreed that this defines what
Yeah.
counts as reserve, and the revolving funds are not reserved.
Yeah.
Even though we may have treated them that in the past, we're not going to in the future. These are the only.
By excluding them, we're actively
Right.
noting that we don't use that term for those anymore.
So when you're adding up the reserve number, you're excluding other revolving funds.
Yeah, those should not be
And
reserved.
where would they sit? Yes.
The revolving funds,
It's all revolving.
which we should be including the entire set of financial pieces in our picture of the budget,
Yeah, yeah.
of which the appropriated is just one column. Grants, revolving fund should be next to each other so we can see the full picture.
Yeah.
We don't really have that every time we're really only focused on the appropriated part. And so we lose that sometimes, that big picture.
So that 3% for,
The E&D.
sorry, E and D, yeah, the 3% for E and D. I guess my question is, why have a minimum balance in that account when we know that to draw from that account is more difficult than to draw from the general stabilization account?
And I think I don't remember if we talked about this at subcommittee or here, but part of the thing here is we could let go of that. I mean, that 3% it is recommended by auditors and financial advisors that we maintain. But our action point was that we'll work towards maintaining an appropriate balance in our excess and deficiency, but not over the priorities of establishing and funding stabilization. So we could take out the sentence with the 3% and let go of that hurdle.
I would get rid of, I think we had already said we don't this committee was not in favor of a range, and I think this is
Yeah.
getting us back into range territory. Less is more.
So if we just let go of that sentence for that, then that'll bring us back to something that we could potentially bring for second reading.
So to recap, 8% total reserves, get rid of the 3%
Driving. Driving.
get rid of 3% reference on E and D.
Yeah.
Strike the red.
Yeah.
In blue,
Keep the blue.
keep the blue.
Keep the blue.
Because again, we're going to have a second read that we can,
Yeah, do we need to anything indicating that when we talk about the 8% is not referencing the OPEB?
Right.
Do we need to be explicit about that? Because
exclusive of OPEB. Yeah.
Do we also need the first sentence or the second sentence about the 15% total, but we are doing 8%?
Yeah, that's the same thing as the recommended by general auditors, right?
Right.
Unless it's recommended by our
I would say,
people, we should take it out.
So we had talked about that, and part of the process was getting input from our actual people on whether that is the case or not. If we don't want, because that was part of the sort of template that was nice to have an outside voice saying, where's this guidance coming from? So if we don't want to have that, we might consider including what our town partners do have though. If we don't want to say what's being suggested to us, we might consider including
Why?
something else there.
I think that it's important to think about like this as a legacy document and that eventually people will be referring to this who are not in this room and wondering where this number came from. And I think providing a little bit of context will give that information. Might not otherwise have it.
And I think it makes
Because
sense.
I feel like find it all that, I mean, I think the three of us have already talked about this. I don't find that valuable because I think as many people, I mean, we define a financial rating agency that thinks it should be 15%. We could probably grab one that thinks it should be 5. I don't find that there's anything just positive about.
So what I think
You're going to do, I think, in terms of a historical document. I hear your point, Kate, that it gives context, but like that sentence to me isn't really context. That's
I agree, because our 8% really came more from consideration of our town partners. So
At this
should we,
moment.
right, so should we be, because say in the future, the towns decide that they're only going to keep reserves of 2% or that they're going to keep reserves of 20%. But if we provided in our document that we used those as a benchmark, then there might be reason for a future committee to revisit the policy in light of the change at the town level.
so like in consideration of the fact that our town partners both maintain reserves in excess of X%.
Or have reserved target, have
Yeah.
their policies state.
I feel better about that than an abstract statement about reserves.
That is better, but I still don't think that we should do that because all other towns don't say that, or even if they're in the district, they don't say that town A and town B have this, that's why we have that. You don't have to reference it. I still feel like less is more.
I would say I'm not going to lose sleep if this comes or goes, honestly, but I do think that it's important to have something in there that gives context for why we chose this 8. If we're going to include this 8, that either it's because, here's what our financial advisors and outside people, not the, people sitting at this table, say is advisable, or in consideration of what our town partners have for their policies. I do think that's really important as a guiding thing to point to where we came up with 8.
Can we, so the policies already include the legal references at the bottom. Can we put a reference to our minutes or something from the discussion so that if anybody wanted to easily access that information, they could click a link?
Because the town reserve right now, even though Manchester, I don't know if it's, but right now, even though Manchester is about 8%, they operate differently than the district. So their reserve level, the needs might change every year. Doesn't mean that our district reserve should be in line with it. So I get that we're trying to have a reference, but it's just, we don't need to. It actually limit us later on to continue to revise the policy.
No, I just mean providing a,
We could provide a link at the reference thing all the way on the bottom, sure.
that's just,
We
if
still
you,
don't need to.
if anybody is interested in this conversation in 10 years, here it is.
I don't know, I feel like
Maybe it'll
it
still be
actually
on the
was
website.
about what the town partners policy numbers was, because Essex, target financial reserve policy is higher than Manchester's. Manchester's didn't just go down to 7, and Essex is still at the 10, 15. It was considerably higher than whatever it is. I looked it up ages ago.
I think Manchester is the guideline of 8.
Yeah, that's my understanding. I think if it will make this policy easier to pass, to put a cross-reference at the bottom to our minutes, I think, yeah, why not?
I don't, it's not a,
I think we should move on.
The references at the bottom should be legal, not,
Yeah,
what do we need to put it under the legal references section?
but also we didn't.
Based on consideration of the need of reserves and the town, our town partners. I don't know, I think I agree with you. To me personally, it is not a necessary piece of this policy. However, in the interest of. For the
That's
love of
fine.
God,
No,
I will.
this is not a sticking point for me either, so.
Then
So strike the 15% total reference.
I'm not going to lose sleep over this. I do think that it's worth it too.
If it helps, we could not get our auditors to give us a number or commit to a number.
That tells you a lot right there.
yeah,
They said 15 is good. Yeah,
Yeah.
you should strive to have a.
Every item's going to tell you more is better.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly what we got out of them.
so to summarize, we're gonna strike the 15%, strike the 3%, but in the 8% section, we're gonna specifically says that it excludes OPEB, yeah?
Yes. Or
Yeah,
that
just make sure we strive to maintain reserves saying 8% of the total operating, general
Oh,
fund,
yeah, we
operating
fixed that.
capital, excluding.
In the EMD section, last word, stabilization, does it have to be?
Well, I should just say general stabilization fund if that's what we're looking for.
Sorry, can you take me to where you,
The last word under the SAD section, that stabilization is capitalized and printing is a term of art. It should be the term of art, general stabilization fund. And then if we want, we can define that and shorten it.
That last little phrase, but not over, that's actually a Triton thing, because they were funding a new thing, right? So that doesn't actually apply to us. We have a stabilization. It is funding.
Well,
Well,
but no, it's not fun. We don't have a.
We don't have a
That
process.
funds in it.
It has fun.
but it doesn't have a process for funding.
so strike establishing.
The district.
Well, what do we mean by priorities of funding the stabilization? Now we're getting back into, is this a budgeting strategy or a policy?
I think we could end that sentence after the district will work toward maintaining an appropriate balance in our excess and deficiency fund. Period.
Strike everything after the comma.
So we can do that. We can write nothing. We don't even have to have one of these folks. We can delete every sentence here. Part of the conversation and purpose here, though, is a recognition. And so my question is, if we do remove some of these things like this, how are we going to memorialize the idea that part of our reserve policy conversation needs to include a recognition that stabilization doesn't self-fund. We have to choose to fund it. And each year, that's one of the first things to go. And so if we even get to that point. So if we're trying to maintain an appropriate balance and we're trying to hit that 3% thing, or funding our stabilization, that's taking the priority. Because that's going to make a difference in the long-term planning strategies.
That's what the 8% target does, because we can only have a max of 5 in EVs. And whether or not we choose
But
fund
the-
stabilization fund is a
If we have
budget
more
strategy.
than five, it has to go to the operating budget. It doesn't go to our stabilization fund.
Right, but we can, in our budget process, we can choose to fund the stabilization.
Right?
Don't.
Can, but we often,
We often don't
Don't.
because we're tight, right? But that's our choice, right? That is a budget strategy and a budget decision. It's not we shouldn't be directed by a policy to prioritize one spending item over another.
it's a worthwhile conversation with this committee though, to think about, there are school committees that do routinely allocate in their budgeting process.
And that's great.
And fund stabilization, is that something we think is a priority or not?
We haven't had a decision.
Absolutely, I think it's a priority, but we don't have the money to do it. And that's why this isn't a position, it's a clarification. That's why people embed it in a
Right.
policy, because it becomes a policy statement that funding long-term capital needs is equivalent in priority to whichever. And if it just happens that when you're getting your general fund discussion, you're solving for the here and now about students, programs, and staff. And the last thing, it's faceless and it gets underfunded all the time. So that's the intent behind a policy like this. So it can be both a strategy and a policy.
But if we include this right now in policy, right now we're looking at what 8 or 9% increase. So most likely this year we're not going to fund the stabilization. So if we have it in the policy, we're going against our policy.
Right. Almost everything in the policy is strive to or attempt to. I mean,
Yeah.
nothing here is binding by design.
It never required
That's
in the language.
with this
We
language.
have the language here, right? When it comes to budget like this, right, the target is 8%. Doesn't mean that we
Strive to.
doesn't mean that we can't go below the 8%.
Or above.
Probably will some years.
Right. So could I make a suggestion maybe that in some of these pieces, rather than getting rid of and adding to right now, that we take a couple of these, like this one in particular, I kind of have strong feelings. I might lose a little sleep about it. And so I'd like to think about it further before we actually cut it and like decide right now, let's cut it. We have to bring this back for a second read anyway. There are other pieces that we've already kind of made some changes on. Could we look at those in their entirety and then count this as one of the things to be thinking on before the next read? I would like the space to do that.
What
I
does
feel
that
like that's reasonable.
So the thing that we just decided, and you're saying that don't strike it. You guys want to review again?
No, it's talking about with respect to this particular
I mean,
last
just
clause.
This clause in particular, yeah. I would ask that we not strike it yet to be able to think on it a little more, see what the outcomes might be, and then discuss it on a second read.
So the district will work towards maintaining an appropriate balance in the interest and efficiency fund, but not over the priorities of funding general stabilization. We're not sure what to do with that yet.
We're just, if people are okay with my request, leave it for now and note that that might be something we talk about, whether to keep that last clause in there or not.
So when you.
But I know I'd like to have that
I feel like
time to think on
the
that.
conversation that we're having right now is the subcommittee conversation, because we're starting to get into like nitty-gritty wording and stuff. I think that it would be helpful for the subcommittee to meet, fine tune, and come back so that the conversation at the committee level is what are the non-negotiables and what are your sticking points that you would vote not to approve the policy.
I agree with you on some of the things we've talked about. This one I actually think is substantive. Like that, this clause, like I think that's a substantive clause that does need to be discussed at the committee
I
level.
was gonna say the same.
I guess I don't understand, like, if the subcommittee is not discussing substantive things,
Oh, we are.
clauses
Yeah.
and bringing forth a recommendation, then what are we doing?
So maybe the request is that we take this and discuss this clause in particular at the subcommittee level and then bring it back with the recommendation and take feedback again.
Is it doesn't, is it gonna take a lot of time
Same
to discuss it? No, unless you guys feel very strongly to.
I think it's the same process either way.
So we lose a lot. We do lose time when we go back to subcommittee because
Yeah.
even though we think it gets decided there, we revisit it and start from scratch when
Yeah.
we get here. So that was some of the thinking behind putting it as a workshop topic, that everybody's here. We don't have other agenda items. It's been a multi-year endeavor. Can we just have that conversation and wrap it up? Because we don't need even a subcommittee for me to delete 3%, doing it right now is speaking.
But
But
my
I-
point on that one specific thing is, we hadn't heard in the last, last meeting, question of that particular clause from after the comma there. I would like to get some feedback from some other sources and some input before just supporting deleting it entirely.
Yep.
What about, so just in the interest of seeing if we can get to consensus, what if we changed it? So the district will work toward maintaining an appropriate balance in our excess and deficiency fund while also considering our priorities of maintaining a funded stabilization fund. I mean,
Because we can change the word, we can change the wording. If the request is to get rid of any reference to stabilization, that's something I need to think on.
well, so that I'm asking the committee, with the proposal I just made, that just tweaks it a little bit, and doesn't kind of set E and D versus stabilization, but does reference our need, because it is in fact a need to have a stabilization fund that can meet the long-term needs of this building, our building.
Say the second part again.
While considering the
While-
funding needs of our general stabilization
Yeah.
fund. While still considering the funding needs of our general stabilization fund.
I mean, to me, we should be.
Let's do that.
So
Stabilization. fund. It should be
That,
separate.
that prompts us
We
to
just
have
did
a
it there.
conversation. Doesn't
Right.
require us to do it.
Yes. While still considering the funding needs of the general stabilization fund.
not to complicate things, does it make sense to divorce it completely from E and D and just take the district will work towards maintaining an appropriate balance in its general stabilization fund and move it to the end of the general stabilization
Yeah, that's
fund
better. Yeah.
paragraph? That way there, you're not just saying one thing over the other.
Yes.
That works.
I think what Teresa's trying to say is we need to somewhere pronounce that it is important for us to fund stabilization. Like,
Yes.
you can't just keep starving capital and trying to keep everything up and running.
So just use the same sentence at the end of the general stabilization fund paragraph.
Right, because actually right now, there's nothing in that
Right. Because we
paragraph
cut out-
about the need to somehow.
About the
have
action.
funding.
Yep.
So we just say it's allowable.
I'm taking it out of the end of E and D fund. And then putting something similar here at the end of district will work toward maintaining an appropriate balance in our general stabilization.
I appreciate that. Thank you for working through that with me.
And now are we okay with this going back to the subcommittee to be?
Vetted and then brought back for second reading.
Yeah, to be honest, I thought we were looking at a revised version already, so.
Take it back to the version
Back
that
to
we
the old
actually
version.
drafted.
I'm gonna help out Teresa's strategy. This is helpful because I do leave it kind of a blur, not really sure sometimes, like we talked about the 3% a lot.
Yeah.
And by the time I open it up after, I'm not so sure.
I actually
I
think
have-
this was really beneficial.
Is there anything else that you guys have in mind? I mean, I definitely feel Pam's point that when we get back to subcommittee, if we add a ton to it, then we're back to the same place of recasting all of this. And so I think if there's any other topics that you guys have in your mind that you think you might want to discuss at subcommittee, we might as well just share them right now to.
Everything we just discussed, for me, brings us to a point of clean it up. I don't need to talk about it at subcommittee and bring it for a second read. That's my personal part on this.
So then maybe it's
We
just
just-
Pam sends the draft to the three of us and we give it the thumbs up to come back for second read.
Because do we have subcommittee before the next meeting?
17,
We have other things to do.
7.
that we could do.
21st.
So the subcommittee will just do a final reading.
Can we put a vote on the calendar for the 21st?
Oh, yeah, Tuesdays and Wednesdays.
We can
Stuff.
put it on, and if it feels like for some reason we're not comfortable with it, we'll just put it on the next, but we can at least shoot for it. It's not like you're reading it whole.
Right.
We meet at noon. If we have something out to everybody by 1 or 2, and I can bring hard copies. Want to come a few minutes early to look. Like, I think the little thing to do is, we have a sentence, E and D was a 2-paragraph entry, and now it's a paragraph and it's hanging sentence. So we can probably just move the statement that it's at maxed at 5%.
So let's do that that day.
Yeah, okay. I'm happy to even do that. You can.
Great.
And we did say that we're striking the red, including the blue,
Is that what you all want to do?
Yes.
striking 15%, striking green.
Yes. So my notes, I struck the whole sentence, financial rating agencies through 15% general operating capital. Next sentence stands with 8%. Then we come down and we eliminate the other auditors reference in the 3% E and D. Then we go down and we strike out all of the red. And we leave the blue.
Question, right behind the title of this section, it says reserve class. How, is that an accounting term that you said class or what?
That was Triton's lingo.
I know, but to anybody that's reading the policy, it might not be as intuitive. So are we trying to say the purpose or what the, or restriction instead of class?
Sorry, where are you?
The class is more, I think some accounting terms is more.
Class is category.
Yes, then we can say category, whatever it is.
Yeah.
You want category, send class?
Where are we?
Or restriction.
So next to excess and deficiency, E and D, it says reserve class operating account.
Yes.
Is this standard language though? Because it, just
Class,
because,
no.
it-
It's not.
okay,
I've never
that's my
heard of it.
question to you.
Yeah.
All right.
And me coming from Triton, I've never heard of it.
So we
Okay.
can
It's
say,
something they created after I left.
Michelle,
Maybe
you've
restrict-
been through all of the different districts. What would you call that?
I would either fund or category.
How about
Reserve
striking it
category?
all together?
You could do that.
Because
No,
what
I-
value is it adding? Really?
Well, I think it's valuable to point out that, or to have that in there, that it does fund operating and capital.
Okay.
E and D and general stabilization, because then OPEB is separate from that.
Are available for,
You said reserve category? Is that what? okay.
usage?
usage.
Use category, yeah. I don't want us to just sit here and throw terms around that are then gonna sound shoddy.
Just,
Yeah.
That should define the reserve funds. Really what should be, yeah, that's all it does, it define the reserve fund.
Yes. Great, making progress.
Great.
so I'm going with usage.
Yeah.
Great.
Are we going on to budget or are we going on to?
We're gonna go on to budget.
Can I make a request? Can we set an end time for this discussion so that we still have time to do the subcommittee charges and the school committee goals? Because we had pushed that back for, I think, 4 meetings in a row. And one of these has a time bound March 2025 on it. We need to get there.
In case riding with me tonight, so that means she's leaving me Thursday.
Okay. Is an hour appropriate?
That's fine. Yeah, 7 now.
Or no?
Is that okay?
Does anyone have to leave? What time did you say you had to leave?
8:30.
8:30? Okay. So is an hour appropriate? We go a few minutes over?
An hour for both
No,
budget
just,
and an hour for budget, and then we,
I would think.
I feel like that might even,
Full hour to like.
yeah.
well,
I
that's.
think we can
Yeah.
do it.
We do 10 minutes.
I just want to make sure that we have time to take care of the rest of the agenda.
Want to set a stopwatch?
No, thanks, I've got plenty of clocks in front of me. I'll be your spare lunch.
So Pam, would you like to, do you have time to kick us off on just
Sure.
maybe a quick update on where we're at?
Health insurance came down to 3%.
Nice of them.
It came down 3%, not 2%. So we get these little updates from them, and the executive summary said that we're down, what, from 26.7% that to 24%. So there has been no, like, last we met was the 11th of December. The world was in holiday. There's been really no significant movement on any of the variables except for the revision that we got in healthcare today down to 24%. And us trying to beginning outreach to different healthcare organizations to start talking about setting up to do bids for this year. So we had our HR meeting today. We're going to work with USI, our current broker, to as soon as rates are available and companies are available to provide bids, go out, get the process started, convene our HIAC team to review what comes in and see if we can improve that number. I think we were talking a lot today, shared this with finance subcommittee. I think, a great news situation for us, I think this year is like a 18%. I think we feel like we won the lottery. It doesn't necessarily move the needle completely on our problem, but it would contribute. When we talked in finance subcommittee today, a couple of variables, the market is high this year, the trend number in our profile is adding pain to that because we are experiencing a lot of large losses, which just means in layperson's terms, we're using more than we're putting in. So we're running through our premiums and they're going to need to make that up in the future. So I have lots of feelings about healthcare companies. Lots of people have lots of feelings. But this is what we're trying to manage. And that is the primary driver to our overage this year. Otherwise, we would probably be in the same general range we would typically be. So we're monitoring that. We're working aggressively to try and bend that number in our favor. Other things we're watching, and we might be able to have some soft commitments for the recommended budget, but we are monitoring out of different placements and then potential age outs that might lead to some relief in that number, which could contribute to the overall bottom line. And we're going through and reviewing line by line and looking for any place that we can make some nips and tucks or tighten. So something like the longevity line. How is that, or is that December assumption still where we think it should be in January, or is there a place we can tighten? So some of the bigger buckets. But other than that, there really isn't anything new. We should never really expect state funding to help us out. It's actually a hindrance, and we won't even get those real numbers until July. So we have our typical placeholder numbers there. So that's it in terms of updates on assumptions.
Can I just add something to the assumption as well?
Yeah.
Just because we spoke quickly about it today. So with our healthcare costs, this really isn't only a 1-year challenge as well. Healthcare costs in general, correct me if I'm wrong, but our healthcare costs are probably going to be really high next year and then hopefully come down in a third year. But again,
By come down,
the future.
by come down, you mean go up by a smaller amount.
No, I mean be negative. Of course, right? But hopefully come back down, towards a more consumable number, within our overall budget. And then, just so we know what we're talking about for dollars, I'm not one ever thinks about, we talk about percentages a lot, but what the actual dollar figure is for that specific, like, our healthcare is going up by 20, we're estimating that our healthcare goes up by 24% this year. What is the actual dollar for that? Do we know, or like an estimate for it?
It's, I believe, it's
1.2 million. You need percentage points about $40,000.
About $40,000, I think.
So the total.
So we just saved 120,000.
So in theory, it came out. Yep.
so these are also just estimates. We don't actually have our renewal numbers yet, so.
Right. our entire budget is just an Essex, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yep. So I'll open it up to the committee if anyone feels strongly about anything to kick things off.
And maybe this is what
Uh,
you were actually asking, me, which is like, what do you want us to consider as we try to put together the recommendation, right? So I would say I'll articulate it. It's always a given. Our priority is students and program first. I used to have a budget architecture pyramid that I shared with people. So we begin with what students' needs are, and we have to start with all of our mandated and required spending. Then we move into ensuring that our program remains competitive. So common spending and preventative maintenance in terms of investing in things like the Earl program. So we don't have students taking disc replacements. So the bulk of our budget really is required spending and common spending that school districts do to maintain comparableness with each other. When and if we get into investing, like when we want to bring back elementary language or bring back sixth grade language or reinstate a librarian, those things usually live in the tip of the pyramid and are done by finding some type of reorganization of efficiency within the existing budget to generate funds. Those have, to my memory, never been directly asked for additional monies in a given year. Something has gone, so something else can come in its place. So the challenge we're going to be up against this year is we are trying to look toward the future and when we're going to be ready, hopefully next budget cycle to look at elementary, maybe next year to look at library. Will there even be available resources in our budget to do so? Because right now, if you're telling me we have to solve the 24% problem, anything we can find that is a good sense move to find an efficiency or create a trade-off, we'll need to go to the bottom line to close that gap. So I think what would be helpful for us is what are some of your personal or committee-based non-negotiables? Like we've had years where the committee has said, I don't care, no program cuts, no staffing cuts. We don't want to see anything go in the program. We've had years where people have said, there's no way we can do this. It's time to start looking at where we can make some fun. So where are you on that front? Where are you on reserve uses? We've had members who've said, let's just pay for the whole thing with reserves and keep everything else status quo. And if you need to move things around, go ahead and move things around. So how much should we be using reserves in this formula? And then what's the thinking of the committee and different individuals on the pass-through cost, right? In reality, this is the budget. The healthcare is healthcare. This is the hand we've been dealt this year. Do we just say this is what it's done to our budget? Here you go. But how much of that do we pass on to the town? So what range should we be looking at in terms of growth rate to the general budget? So that sounded more, hopefully wasn't as confusing as it sounded in my head, but kind of what are some of the parameters you'd like us to work?
Go ahead, Teresa.
So I've been thinking about this a lot, knowing that we're coming into a workshop model. And so we have the opportunity to vet ideas and thoughts about this. And the thing that I keep coming back to is this idea that this spike is due in part to a higher market for everyone, but also due in part to our increased usage, right? With some high ticket use. And what I don't feel comfortable with is a conversation where we're looking at the numbers of this. We've got this 24% spike, right? Where we're used to, hoping around 8 to 10 managing. And after just negotiating very recently with input from town partners and being invited to the process, this budget where healthcare is a benefit that we give our teachers. And now we have some high ticket usage, which means we have some teachers who are going through the worst times of their life. And having the benefit of the healthcare that we offer by part of their contract, they're using that, meaning that what comes with it is our discussion of layoffs. I'm not comfortable with that. And that's what I think we need to reconcile as well when you talk about things like the pass-through cost. And so in thinking about how do we reconcile this within a finite budget, one idea might be to separate those two things. We have what our standard conversation is each year. We start at 7 or 8, we try to whittle down, we do we kick the tires and we sharpen pencils. Aren't those the things we do? And have that conversation, and let's do that thing, right? And get that down and utilize reserves in the way we have been and OPEB in the way we have been as the regular budget conversation. But maybe we could consider looking at that specific amount in a different way and almost separate from this budget conversation. How are we going to reconcile that amount? And with that, even separately looking at what could our reserves handle? Could our OPEB work with this, knowing that our teachers union wants to use their benefits? What could we do? And yes, what additional support could our towns bear? But when we're talking about the budget in its completeness and this big spike, we are literally talking about program reduction because we have sick teachers. And I'm not comfortable with the message that sends. So that's my quandary and my possible suggestion for a work forward.
Clarifier, so something in your mind, it's something along the lines of the market increase this year is 10%. So that's something you would absorb in a typical year.
Yeah.
So anything above 10%, 11%.
Let's
is
look at that
subject
as a
to
special
reserve usage or special cost or alternative funding source, and work with a budget that maintains kind of a status quo carry forward.
That's my thinking on this as one possibility.
To sum up what you just said, is to include 10% in the health insurance cost. And then the other 14%, whatever percent that is, take it from reserve.
I'm not saying take it from reserve. I guess what I'm saying is just look at it separately as a separate problem to solve. Maybe that's something the finance subcommittee wants to delve into a little bit and discuss. What are some options? What if any more could our reserves bear separate from the regular budget discussion that we have, where we're already putting in, 350, if that's the number we carried forward, and 150 from OPEB. But separate from that, looking at what our OPEB actuarial, numbers are, and could, given this extraordinary circumstance, could we absorb more from OPEB? Because this is specifically a healthcare issue for our teachers right now. They might be in support of doing that in order to keep our budget conversation, the standard budget conversation. Yeah, we can't have, 10% growth in a year, 8% growth in every year. Let's do the reorganization and the things that our strategic plan was designed for. All of those reconfigurations to keep our numbers down in the area where we were last year. I don't think 2.5% is reasonable, but that's the conversation we have, right? Is it 2.5? Is it 3? Is it 3.5? Is it 4? But the regular conversation, but take that big jump separately, because that's such a scare factor, and it's just not reasonable of us to offer a benefit and then have the outcome of that benefit be that these people or their peers are potentially losing jobs.
What's the dollar amount of that 14%?
But 600,000, 588. Just piggyback on Teresa's point, because I think you make a really important point, but that is our entire budget narrative year over year. The salaries rates we've agreed to and the benefits package that we have offered and committed to puts our budget over 2.5% consistently. So we are always cutting ourselves to fund ourselves.
Agreed. And maybe this is an opportunity rather than
Conversation, long-term conversation,
Right.
but that
But
is the state of school budgets across.
right.
the state.
But where we generally have that conversation, though, is down in the lower areas where
Yep.
we know our two town partners, we can work to get it to something that does end up being manageable, even if it's not 2.5, but closer to manageable. This is exorbitant. I don't think it'd be fair to just pass this right on, but there are some other mechanisms we could use if we want to choose to look at it separately. And maybe it's a combination of those things.
So if we were to take out the 600,000, 14% from the regular budget, so what is the percentage increase in the budget expense over the previous year from the 9% rate?
You're saying if we pretend that our health insurance is only.
Yeah.
9%,
Then where
what
do
would-
we
what was
come
it?
in?
What did it increase last year?
So it's gonna be low.
But the only issue is that that's great in terms of this 1 year funding issue,
Right.
but health insurance is never going to go down.
Yeah.
So this is going to be a compounded issue the following year and the following year. So if you.
So that conversation has to be a long-term trajectory.
Absolutely.
Yes. But it may be that this is a good opportunity to have to do it.
Is it the case that the town partners are only seeing, or like the average healthcare increase right now is approximately 10% and we're double that? Because I didn't think it was that. I thought, I've never been.
That's what we're here.
Yeah,
Oh,
it is.
really?
Yeah. Interesting.
Manchester's 10%, okay. Is it
Really?
Is that what Essex is hearing?
No, we're hearing 15%.
All right, so
I mean, I totally hear you, and I think there's some really smart aspects of that, in particular, thinking about OPEB, which I continue to think about because I'd really like to understand it better and understand from an actuarial perspective. If there is a way we can do, as you say, and offset some of these costs, which make total sense to offset from OPEB, given its purpose, while also meeting the obligation for which it was designed. Like, we don't, I think if we start
right.
we are so lucky to be in a district whose school committee had the wherewithal to put this together. I don't want to interfere with that long-term goal, but that's where we really need it. I don't know if this is for you guys or Michelle or for the party to say, you actually do have the space to do this. I don't feel like we have enough information yet to understand.
No, and that's what I'm suggesting is that be the work that I'm not suggesting we do know right now. And again, maybe a combination of things. And again, I'm not saying it shouldn't include some pass through. But whatever it is.
But the part that I was going to say gets tough, you were alluding to this, and sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just wanted to complete that thought, is that this year, it sounds like ours is dramatic. Like next year, what if it's like it's higher than our town partners, but not quite as high? How do you know? Are we putting ourselves in a position where this is replicable?
It's supposed to be higher next year as well.
Right. And next year, definitely will. I'm just saying this.
In the
Which
10%
years are these things extraordinary? Which years is usage? No.
But the adjustment won't go away. So if we fund the
Right.
60, extra 600,000 with combination of reserves. So OPEB has to go toward retiree healthcare. So
Right.
you can bring down your retiree health line.
Right.
Or you can defer payments to OPEB. Semantics, it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. So we can address 600,000 this year. We can probably address it again next year, but if you go up 15% next year, it's 15% on the total. It's
Right.
not 15% on the part that we're including in the operating budget. So this goes back to the kind of the Groundhog Day conversation about reserves are a fine tool to use as a bridge loan to a long-term permanent correction. So if you want to factor on a 3-year or 5-year bridge, then we can figure out based on what we have now, how long that money will last before we have to have it more taxable.
And I'm not suggesting that we drain this money. Again, what I'm suggesting is just that we consider it separately from the discussion of program and policy. That this is an amount we're going to have to look at now and in future because we're going to have a reset, starting from higher for future. And we have ES coming up and all those things. But that could be looked at in terms of how much of that do we just pass on versus how much can we absorb separately.
Do you see the program policy part just staying level services? Like we shouldn't be growing.
I think we talked about that before too, and my opinion was I don't believe that now's the time to be growing anything. And I'll wait my turn, but I have another full thought on it if we decide to go a different route for that.
So I appreciate the idea that we might be able to rethink OPEB contributions, given its purpose. I'm not quite sure how current teacher needs are the same as retiree health needs, but maybe there's something under there. I'm not sure that the finance committee has any insight into that would help the conversation, but certainly Pam and Michelle
probably want to ask the actuary to kind of give us
Yeah,
their
could,
assessment.
could look into that.
150 was the number we arrived at after their last assessment and discussion.
So I appreciate that. What I don't understand in your suggestion is how the options, if we treat it separately, how are the options any different than talking about the budget?
What do you mean, the option?
I think that it facilitates just the direction of the conversation.
It's a messaging issue. And I completely agree with that. But funding that, even if we treat it separately, funding it, seems we have the same options, right?
In the end, probably yes. But if we're having a conversation here about reducing our overall growth from what was the top percent? I can't even remember. It was a month ago. From 15% to 2.5% versus taking some of that and saying, this is extraordinary. We're not going to reduce the whole program because of this one thing. Let's look at that and find a solution for that in another box. In the end, yeah, the numbers all come back together to put together the budget that has to be voted upon. But I think there's value in considering. So I guess what I'm suggesting is that we do not cut the operational budget in a way that we do not cut the operational budget to account for this specific number, the healthcare extraordinary.
Yeah, so I'll just, if I can just follow up real quick, I'll just say, I'll say the same thing I've said over and over again, which is I have a real hard time having this conversation without a longer term picture, right? We could probably solve this year's check with reserves. We have enough, right? Maybe even for 2 years. But we're setting ourselves up. I mean, we're going to have the same conversation, the same challenge next year or the year after, both. So somehow we have to look at the bigger picture here and plan out.
So can I ask a question? Can I ask a question? So I know that you brought it up and other members of the committee have brought up a longer term picture. What do you mean by that? Do you mean when we should be asking our member towns for a major correction to our budget?
Yeah. And what's it
we should be asking?
what's it going to take to get there? And we work with the towns on mapping that out. And what would it take to get support for that?
Not only that, but even internally for us to look at every year, this is how we are changing. What does that mean for the reserve, especially if this year we're utilizing the reserve? What does reserve look like? And we can predict that over the next few years. And then to see how does that all line up with the programming to make sure everything makes sense. I agree that this is a short-term solution, but right now, the current financial plan, it doesn't really give us the pictures of what we should be looking at to solve the problem. Right now, we don't have a solution.
All right.
We need to start looking.
So in general, just so historically everyone understands where we're at, right? We were, the administration and the school committees previous to ours were working towards that. And was it last year, Pam, or the year before when we were planning for
2 years.
2 years ago, right? We were planning for a correction and that didn't occur, right? So we've been using more and more of our reserves to keep the lights on at the school district level. So we're already, we have an immediate need to fix what we were planning for 2 years ago. We still haven't fixed that. So trying to plan 5 years out, we haven't even fixed what the plan was from 2 years ago. Doesn't.
2 years ago, our reserve was like 13-14%. So
But reserves don't, so we talk about reserves a lot, right? Reserves, you cannot fund an operational budget.
I totally get that. Well, I think we might.
But then-
The difference, in my opinion, between prior years planning for the future and this year planning for the future, so this year we have a time frame for ES. So we can actually pinpoint when that vote is going to need to go through, when we're going to need to come up with that money. And I feel like using that time frame makes it easier for us to have that conversation with our towns about budget corrections. And I think that it's going to be a lot more palatable to Essex to be talking about operational overrides when we have dealt with Essex Elementary.
So you're saying you want to get through Essex Elementary?
I think we at least need to get to a vote for Essex
My
Elementary.
concern with that, and I understand why that makes sense, but my concern with that is, so then we are now looking at the major funding hurdle of Essex Elementary School and also saying, and on top of that, we also need.
Another, like,
So
significant.
it just seems to me that for the taxpayers, that's going to be a hard set to swallow. I actually think we'd be a lot better off in terms of like just where we could get buy-in. Trying to do it sooner rather than give the towns all of this all at once.
I agree that it's, if it were to all happen in the same year, it's hard. I also think that it's going to be doubly hard to get a correction in Essex before we have EBS. And I don't mean before we have a completed project, I mean before we
4
have.
years out, new teacher's contract coming up, and no one's getting paid.
No, we're voting on it. We will be, the town is voting on it, yes. Sooner than 4 years. What is this timeline for? Well, appendix for spring 27. And so we're talking about budgets for right now to get us through spring 26. And then there would be one more to get us through, but spring 27, which is when we would be voting.
Right, but then we're gonna expect taxpayers to pay for school in the very next year. Like, it's gonna have to be at least another couple of years out before anything's palatable to do any type of correction. And then I just don't see what type of school district we have at that point. If we're talking about like another 5 years out before, we don't have the reserves, we don't have.
So Chris, what's the alternative?
What that is dropping in 2030. So it's coming, the expense is gonna decrease. We just need to plan it out, what's gonna happen, how we manage in between.
7 years.
But Chris, what's the alternative to planning for a major correction? We go and ask every year for an override?
That's one option.
And
That's been presented by some town leaders.
I feel like, before we go into the recommendation about doing the 10% for health insurance or putting in a separate bucket, whatever it is, and assuming that no change in programming, I would like, the administration to actually look at the efficiencies within to see is that, so we can actually present it to the public that we already look at X, Y, and Z, and there's no other path to be cut, or like adjusted, restructure, I shouldn't say cut. And then this is the savings that now, like I think today you mentioned potentially at most you could buy 150K, something like that. That's do that work, and so because I do think that story, that communication will make it seem like we are already, there's nothing else, and it will help us to better justify the budget increase. Because not, I don't know how much more it's going to be over the 2.5 or 3.5%, but it will help us to justify.
Yeah, I agree. We definitely need to do everything we can to reduce as best we can the general budget.
We're in workshop form. Are we not raising hands?
Raise your hand.
I agree. And again, my original idea that I put out there supposes that that's exactly what we will do. Everything we can to get that kind of regular budget conversation down as low as possible. But you asked what's the alternative? And one alternative, not a popular one, but an alternative is to send a higher bill to our member towns. So part of what I keep being reminded of here, it's not, I'm not supporting that, I'm not promoting it. I am saying it is an answer to the question. And one thing that I'm reminded of as we keep talking about this is that we don't ask for overrides. We set a budget and then the towns choose how they structure their budgets and their funding mechanisms. And sometimes we're pretty clear that if we come in at this kind of point or over, it's going to trigger an override because that's where the towns have told us their bandwidth is. But if the trigger for an override, well, the only information we get is 2.5%. That's so low as to be in the realm of absurdity, given what we're dealing with. And so if we are interested, I would suggest that we consider that if we are interested in passing EES, that we consider also potentially sending a higher bill to our member towns so that we're not cutting program in advance of asking our both towns, not just Essex, but Manchester as well, to pay for that. Costs are not going down. As we're getting, looking toward hiring an OPM, we're seeing costs are going up. It may level out, but it's not going to be the same, as what it was 3 years ago. So
I completely agree with you.
I'm answering the
Completely
question.
agree with you in principle. That makes sense. But at the rates we're talking about now,
Mhm.
and if what we heard at finance committee that, tightening up is only 200,000.
Can I clarify that?
But
Between now and when we send you a recommended budget next Wednesday night or Thursday morning, the only thing we could, about 250 to 300,000 of adjustment to be made at this point, with the assumptions, not in total
Whatever.
to the floor.
okay, that helps. Thank you.
Yeah, because
I did.
so when we were talking this afternoon, I would say, don't expect anything too dramatic between now and the budget we talk about on the 21st, because we won't have a new solid healthcare number. If we take it down, the 3 points and change, it's about 140,000. We're going to look again at some tuitions. We might be able to commit to 100,000 or so reduction. So between now and next Wednesday, we can probably trim about 300,000. That there's more potential based on how open we are to different things.
My point is, even if we get the percent down from 9 and 10 to, let's say, 5.
Yeah.
Right? What we're hearing from the towns right now is they are not planning for 5. Even Manchester's not planning for 5. Right? So whether or not they can handle it is a different question, but that's why we need to be planning with the towns, right? So I don't quite understand this, like, we tried it, therefore why we give up. I don't quite understand that philosophy, because we need to know as best we can if it will trigger an override, because if it does, if that's their mechanism, then the town's going to say, well, you just asked for an override. And now you're asking for Essex and another override the next year, because our budget can only fund the next year, right? We can't ask for money that will cover us for several years out.
It just seems to be so important that we've had this conversation. I'm not sure what's happened to the collaboration committee, task force, whatever it's called. But, we have these two competing objectives. One, to have our program at least maintain level services, and 2, to pass Essex Elementary School. My feeling is that if we allow our program to falter, it is not going to help our other goal of passing Essex Elementary School. So this is to the point you made, Teresa. I think it's really important to figure out how to do both, but doing both is very expensive, and we need to figure out the timing. We need to figure out how to make those things work, and I don't do that without having a conversation with the people sitting behind us.
I just want to add it. Can I add a third? You don't have a third hand, but right, a third piece to that puzzle, which is the program that we don't want to compromise, the Essex Elementary project, and then acknowledging that part of the financial crunch is the third piece, which is the memorial project that has already been passed, that we're still paying for. Because I think that it is unfair to leverage the program against an Essex Elementary when Essex has already committed to memorial, which our district, our whole district benefits from. But I don't think that it's fair to just take those two pieces without acknowledging that part of this financial crunch is because of the memorial project.
Sure, that's a fair way to message it, and I appreciate why that's important, but
Crunch isn't really, that was a debt exclusion, already proved, it's not really part of our.
But it's part of the tax.
Right, but it's part of the money that's
it's
coming
part of it. I get what you're saying, but the things we are confronting
most directly right now, is what I'm saying. And I do know why the memorial project, and probably this project, all of these things that we've done in the past impact where we are today. But the fact remains that we have two upcoming decisions. So I guess we should need to be clear in our messaging that those decisions are influenced by the choices we've made and the things we've agreed to as a district. And I hear you on that, but it doesn't change the things we're going to be going.
Regarding because you make a really good point. Just because we tried something in the past and it didn't work doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. And I think it's really compelling that, again, we do have a new input here with a time-sensitive EES vote. And so for what it's worth, if what you mean when you say we should be working with the towns, I mean, I know town partners attend these meetings, here attend those meetings. I know the conversations happen between, with Pam. I know these things happen. If what you're asking or suggesting is collaboration group as it was formerly known, excuse me, the group formerly known as collaboration group, there's no reason that can't be convened. The only thing that was a sticking point there was it being an open meeting. And the school committee has made every one of our subcommittees open meetings. We're broadcasting them. I think it'd be great to have the chair and vice chair of each of these groups or whatever configuration of what was once a collaboration meeting and discussing and planning in this way. Absolutely. The sticking point for me is simply that these be open meetings. I'm not in support of behind closed door meetings in this day and age, but yes, there's no reason we couldn't be doing that.
So should we reach out again?
Sure. I would support that.
I think that is a whole nother conversation, but it's directly tied into our goals, which we are getting to at 8:00.
And direction on, as a committee, what we would like to recommend her to work on budget wise.
So here's what I'll say. If we do not have town support for Dover or whatever correction
Well, clearly,
mechanism that they might need for a high percentage, then we have to do what we can to avoid that. Because the last thing we need is another failure, because then we'll have a track record of it and it threatens things for the next 3 to 5 years. And so from my perspective, if we can get town support for that, then let's move for it, but we got to start working with them now. If not, then let's use reserves. It's the level we need. We got to trim everything we can before we commit to those reserves. But if we have it now, let's do it. It's a successful override is a successful correction, whatever mechanism that is critical for the next 3 to 5 years.
Michelle, if you can get a little model for us, if we use what we need to use, if you do what Jake just suggested, which I think I agree with. Obviously, we're in the same boat next year, of course. Can we see, and we just said that Essex vote is in 2026 or 2027. Can we see if we can even get there? You know what I mean, with projecting out what our
You said reserves, the only things we don't, we vote on, no idea what they're doing. Which I expect. And I'll look at that. As our budgets get tighter.
Yeah, right. I mean, is there any way to just include some assumptions, model that out? I'd like to know, are we just delaying the inevitable? The next year, we're going to be in a position and that much closer to the EES vote.
Yes.
So I think it's pretty clear that we won't as a coalition next year because our health insurance numbers not going to. So generally in the stables 1.4 million.
But we also have commitments for that. So if we're doing this, we have commitments for that money over the next couple of years. So we're putting off
That's stabilization.
Oh, okay, so we're not talking about state, okay.
So we'll do some PAM now.
Yeah.
So 1.4.
Yeah.
With an existing commitment of 350, which just to make level services, if we use your model.
Yeah.
We're gonna need to go to 500.
Right.
So you have 3 years of general level services funding in date. Maybe 4, you have a good year and can return some money. But if you're looking for another 600,000 in reserves, you're done in about a year.
Right.
So I think what Eric is asking and what Dana and I asked at the finance committee is, rather than doing verbally every meeting, can we model something out that we can all look at and or play with? I know Avi had something that we played with periodically. I don't know if it's the same thing, just updated, more detail if that's possible, whatever. But I think we need to be able to see that, right? And know what the assumptions are in it. We have to make assumptions. So that we can actually, it's not going to be perfect, right? But it'll be something.
And if we're building a model for this, could such a thing include an option for the impact of increasing our like the bill that we send, if it's at 3.5, if it's at 4.5, if it's at 5, rather than just absorbing the entire thing in reserves. This is going to impact the borrowing. There are other implications here if we spend down all our EAD. So,
There's also, when we use reserves, and I'm a little hesitant to bring this up, but when we use reserves to cover our operational budget, we're using total number to then make a reduction for both of our member towns. So 60% essentially of the reserves that we're using are being done, are basically going to reducing the overall bill for one of our member towns, which has excess against, has a lot of excess built up now. So essentially, it's almost like we're using a lot of reserves to only really reduce, like 40% of, the money. Like if it was possible to have towns sort of decide what they wanted to pay individually, then one town would say like, okay, we're good here. And so just so we understand, when it comes to dollars and money, if we were to send out a budget without using reserves, I think it would only equate to one town, for instance, maybe having to use only 40% of that reserve number to then fund what a budget that would be acceptable for both towns, right? Do you guys understand what I'm talking about? Kind of following it?
No, it's, so for every cut or reserve dollar used, we need to use 3 times the amount necessary to meet the need of that.
But to be clear, both towns are going to be facing very, very tight financial budgets in the next however many years.
Thank you. Yeah, every year.
Okay, so then it's not
Right.
something that we're doing for one town, and it's not 16% being up in
Because of the way the apportionment has moved over the past 5 years and the increasing rate to one town versus the other, one town has been having to pay a much higher percentage increase in their budget than the other. So one town has a lot of excess levy to simply fund, and another of our member towns doesn't, because they've been using all of their excess levy over the past 5 years to fund their much higher percentage increase to our budget.
and this is where that conversation with a collaborative group would take place and be beneficial, because we're not the only ones who have E&D that could be used to offset an extraordinary difficulty. And there are other questions and conversations to be had for that planning.
So Pam, did you want to clarify what I said, since
No, I think we beat that one.
everyone gets it?
Don't know that.
I'd like to ask another question too, just because it hasn't really come up. I've heard this from several different areas, that there are some high but, high numbers at the elementary level in few classes. Like, what happens to our budget if, and, we won't know this, right, but, I know there was a couple of new students that just entered today into some already really big classes. I don't think that affects us next year because I think those classes are graduating to the middle school, but I know there's a few other sections that are also high, so what happens to our budget if we need to, or how high do we go, or what happens, how do
I
we
think
handle
that we first would need to agree as a committee that we are willing to allocate savings from finding efficiencies to adding staff. Because I don't think that we are in a place to add any staff, and I think that I hear the feedback about the class sizes. The piece that conversation is missing to me is that in such a small district, we do not have the flexibility to design classes of 20 students. So if we have two classes of 25 students, we have 50 students in that grade. We divide it into 3 classes and we're going to have 16 or 17 students at a cost of $80,000.
It's super hard, but that's why we have had benchmarks for this reason, because at some point, even though it would mean a smaller class size, we recognize that it's our belief that the educational value is so diminished by a class size at a certain height. The other point I want to bring up about that is I've now heard from 3 parents who are all thinking about leaving the district as a result of our class sizes. Now, will it happen? Is it a threat? I'm only bringing it up because we talk all the time about how that can impact apportionment. And it can, and it does. And obviously that's the reason that we do this, but I think it's worth being aware of when we are getting emails, when we are hearing concerns about this patches.
But
All right, well, my follow-up to that is this other thought that I'm having, which is that if part of the conversation of this Groundhog Day conversation is that we need to drastically overhaul the program, right, in order to stop having this repeat conversation, because we can do this every year, we do. It's not fun, but do it. But if that is the conversation, then truthfully, I think that our families with younger kids need to get used to larger class sizes. I don't love the idea. I'm not advocating for it in any way, shape, or form. But I think there's also value to recognizing that the strategic plan we're working in right now was developed with essentially a level growth, right? 3.5% to 4% growth, understanding that with apportionment, that's how that's impacted. And the reinvestment from efficiencies and retirements and things like that are what run any improvements through this strategic plan. But if we're going to redo our program, instead of cutting everything at the high school for all the families that have invested their time here and cutting all of that, we really need to think this whole strategic plan. And part of that is going to need to be a conversation about class sizes so that we're setting expectations at the younger grades that this is what our district is. Because if we're cutting at the high school, you're going to get higher class sizes at the high school as well. You're not just getting rid of those little tiny classes. We're going to end up with bigger class sizes there too. And so it's a much broader conversation that when we say get rid of the program, we really need to be thinking about what's going to be happening at the elementary. Why are we focusing on trying to keep class sizes 16, 17, 18, or 18 to 20 when we're going to shuffle them through to a program that's being cut at the high school? People might choose to make different decisions.
I think that-
Hold on. I just never got an answer as to what that does to our budget. So do you end up needing to?
So there's the way we've addressed staffing growth is in a cyclical mode, which is when we had larger classes at the elementary level, we were able to move staff from secondary to the elementary. And then those staff members, as enrollment declined, we took some out through attrition. We blended some roles across the 2 elementary schools, but we also moved some FTE to the high school and middle school to address the larger class sizes that were emerging here. So yes, now we're coming down in general size at the secondary, but we're starting to tick up again at the elementary. So if we stay right around that 140, 144 mark for staffing, we can continue to cycle people through and into different roles without having to make direct additions to the staff. That's why it stays relatively flat, but people move from location to location, or we cut a position, but we don't cut an FTE, we just bring it back in a different format. If we continue to take all of our potential reductions and attritions as direct budget reductions, then the only way to get them to address class size will be to need additional money to the budget to add a person. So it just depends on which model, where we end up this year and need to reduce the overall number versus having some options for redistribution.
But then I think that it's important to remember that the class size conversation is a narrative that is coming from a very small portion of our general school population. I believe there are 2 grades at Memorial that we've heard this complaint about. They are both going to graduate to the middle school within the next 2 years. And so I'm confused about why we are devoting so much time to this conversation. We have so much enrollment data and we have put so much time into class size reports. If we have a class size problem that is generalized throughout the district, I think that we would have heard about it as a more pressing issue from our principals, and it wasn't presented as a pressing issue from our principals. We do have 1 grade at Memorial that still has 3 sections, and it is Mr. Willis's job to decide how he is allocating the staff, and we decided to put that teacher in that grade level with the information he had for a reason. So I think that it's fair enough for parents to talk to him about it. I think that obviously we appreciate the feedback. I don't think that it means that we have a class size issue. And I would have concerns about adding teachers when we could be saving money at this point. I think that these are the years between now and the EES vote are the years to be as thrifty as possible.
And it's kind of fun. We heard Mr. Wilson's feedback. It's different this year.
I didn't hear it as a pressing issue. I think that it was added as a nice to have.
I'll stand by. I heard it differently.
So because this also conflicts with, when we talked about a few weeks ago, that there's a lot of capacity, and that's why we're adding more school choice. Right?
But we're adding more school choice at the middle school and high school level. We're not adding any.
Right, so Pam said that, resources can be reallocated. So the middle school, high school resource could be allocated in elementary and all that stuff, things can be moved around.
Right, we can't say she doesn't want it to be moved.
Well, so to be clear, we're not reallocating staff. It's a different person. If you're teaching in the middle or the high school, you have a license to teach in the middle and the high school. If we're cutting that position, we're hiring somebody else for the elementary school, most likely. Teachers who are teaching high school level.
I'm sorry, did you say that?
That's what, yes.
Okay.
So that's
I
why
thought she was saying
bit in the lingo.
so had brought people down from
Yeah.
Just what it sounded like, but
Oh,
So we eliminated a position at the elementary and moved the FTE to the high school.
doesn't mean
That
the
doesn't mean
person.
they moved the person, they moved that
That-
cost.
Ms. Jones retired, the FTE gets pulled out of Memorial School, and it's allocated to the high school hires a math teacher.
And Anna's point is, if we oversubscribe high school, we lose the ability potentially to reallocate FTEs the other direction. Not sure that adding 20 students is going to do that across however many grades that are being distributed, but it is a thing we should be attending.
Is there a conclusion to this?
It's a workshop.
I think in the past, Pam, wasn't there a year where there were class size concerns and parents were told that they could drive their child to Essex Elementary?
I think it was
if they were-
a little bit more. Hopefully very early, 2010, 11, 12. So this is really funny because the whole thing is quite cyclical. We were seeing surges, beginning of the surges at the elementary school. we did not have the resources, first year, I think, to add a teacher in the summer. So the offer was made to do a cross-district enrollment, that if class size was really important, we understood that, and you could take your child at Essex or Memorial, depending on the class. You just have to be responsible for transportation. So that's probably where the driving came in. But nobody really wanted to cross enroll. And it was hopefully said gently. It was a way to address the class size issue without hiring a teacher at the time. But we don't have the ability to redistrict without consent. That's the regional agreement.
But since we have the three possibilities that our feasibility study is looking at, the more classes we have and the more grades we have in one space, the more flexibility we have in terms of class size. So that is a consideration. I'm not advocating for it either way, but if you have 5 sections of 4th grade all in one location, you have a lot more flexibility to meet that 20, 22 students rather than having 50 split between 2 classes here and 50 split between 3 classes there.
I think we can probably move on from this particular topic, but I will say, having had a student in that bubble class that we're talking about, so I had when they were at Memorial, don't underestimate the level of commitment families can have toward wanting those changes addressed if they have students in that. I agree with you, this is a district-wide problem. I'm just saying, I think we should be mindful of it because I understand why it's a priority. I've lived it. And I've heard from a lot of people who are living it now, and I think people will hear more.
There's one thing that I feel like has not changed since the beginning of the district as I understand it, is people's desire for small class size and in the attention that the teacher can provide when you have that 18 to 22 range that your upper grades.
And I asked Mr. Willis about that a little bit because when he was talking about it, it strikes me that it has become a more pronounced issue over time because I think we have the statistics to show that at the same time as classes have started to get larger again, needs have also increased. And when you combine those two things, I think it's not surprising because I think we've talked about before that there's some research that suggests that maybe class size isn't nearly the thing we all think it is. But I think when you combine increased class size with increased needs, then it's easy to see why that could impact a student's experience in the classroom. So anyway, there's other bigger points on our budget, but I think we'll come up with this. We do too.
So
We are.
Any guidance so far? Any guidance so far?
My guidance is to pinch all of the pennies until 2027, and that we should be looking to reserve use to facilitate that as much as we can. And I never thought that I would say that because I don't want to use any of our reserves, and I know that it's not a sustainable financial practice, but if we can come to an agreement with our town partners that there is an end point.
But then we are literally talking about 2028. We still haven't had the roll off of the high school debt. And we will have just asked taxpayers to approve the debt for Essex Elementary School. And then we will need to ask for a correction. I don't know. I don't know what narrative is right now. Just right time.
Virtually, what is it? $8 million range? Oh,
I mean, all I can offer is, if we look at the years 15, 16, 17, we had an override, failed. Came back the next year, did an override and a compromise, and then passed the building the following year. So it's happened before, which is the proper order for this time, I'm not certain.
Right.
But people tolerated it at that point. The needs got significant. There were a lot of needs. It was a compromise override. It wasn't in everything we want. I mean, there were actually I don't recall any real growth items other than class size. We needed more teachers because we had that 20% surge. If people were driven and motivated to give us more resources to add teachers.
Right. And that correction
It was about
was overridden.
$700,000 is what it was. It wasn't significant. And it was primarily to get us, to allow us to get a teacher or two and get off using reserves as a form of job. So we're about 10 years out.
It's 8 o'clock.
Hmm?
It's 8 o'clock.
Do you have the input you need? It's, I don't know that we have consensus, but
We need a little bit of everything.
yeah.
So are you coming back next time, January 21st, to have a different budget?
We'll do what we think is our best shot, at least knowing what we know between now and next Wednesday.
Just the public hearing?
No,
that's
remember we
Oh, that's right.
reorganized it, so that's going to be kind of the next iteration of the budget.
Yeah.
Call it the recommended budget, so what we think it can be. Then we'll do feedback session on the 4th of February, and then we have about a month to figure out where we're going to go.
John, you've been a little quiet down the end. Do you have any
Just listening every,
take on that?
I mean, my suggestion is start with level services, find efficiencies wherever you can. And let's see what it looks like.
Yeah, I just want everyone, are we all on the same page? It will look the same, pretty much, except.
Yeah, no, I agree.
That's what.
Yeah, that's what it's gonna look like.
So next time, January 21st, would you also have time to bring us the different scenarios about the OPAD, what it means, the different reserve, the level over the next 2-3 years?
We can certainly talk about it. I don't know if we get into the detail level we're looking for. We could also bring in the OPEB consultants. Should be one of them.
Could we do this, Anna? Could we target the next meeting to have the multi-year budget model updated and ready to go? I know it's not as detailed as you want, but I think all of our known numbers will be in there in our basic assumptions. And it will start to show you what we're going to run at the next few years. Which will give you a sense of how much reserves you're going to need to close your basic gaps. And you can plug numbers in, try different scenarios. So we can grow the healthcare to 18% for next year and see what that does to the bottom line. But that's going to help you look at reserve trajectory. And then we have to put in a call to OPEB. I mean, we are also running, bad timing, but we're running the RFS process in parallel. So on the days we're not working on the budget, we're working on that piece. Because once we secure the OPM, we can set that in motion and buy back. So our goal is to have that process completed for what we anticipate will be probably along March of October. Typically, even after we adopt a budget, there's continued deliberations on how to solve it.
Another thing we talk about in the finance subcommittee is the line the major contracts for the next few years. So right now, our insurance, we can change the vendor, but you can change the service because it's already built into the teacher's contract. And we're here to get if we afford. So we should line up the health provider contract with the teacher contract. Because if the money is tight, it's reasonable for us to change the benefits and determine how much that's going to be saving. So right now we just have, we can't do anything because the contract is tight. We need to rely on it.
We can impact bargain. Like if we strike out, if we go out for bid, because I was thinking about that since we met earlier today. If we go out for bid and we get 30%, we'll take you on for, 2 years at 18%. It's not, we don't get reasonable results. We can ask the union to go to the table for impact bargaining because we want to change the plan. So we can open the contract at any time. I don't. If you've all negotiated, many of us have negotiated and said, those, if we ask for a give there, we're going to have to find some money to give someplace else because I don't think it's going to be okay, shift the cost back to the employee and
we'll move on and ratify. So I think you've seen what's been going on with associations. So I don't know how plausible it is to ask them to change their benefits, not in their interest to solve the problem. But I get Anna's point, and we have, that is how we did establish OPEB as part of contract negotiations. It's almost, I would recommend it's better to work with them on looking at the long-term plan, get some concessions, and then go out to bid, because you're never gonna get the timing right with the length of time it takes to negotiate. But it's definitely worth looking at, and I think we had said, and set in our notes of negotiation into the contract that looking at OPEB was on the list for next time around. Am I right on that, Kate? Yeah.
That's skeptical.
So yeah, it makes sense. I sense a lot of the frustration. A lot of the frustration is that it's government, and it's a government collaborative, government contract environment, and some things are totally in our, many of the things which cause the increases to the budget are not within our planning ability or control. The pieces that we can control are the ones that we volunteer. So it's an annual setup for a lot of stress and or choosing between bad and worse options. But we'll do our best to try to put something cup half full and keeps everything moving. If you've got ideas or thoughts, just send them our way.
So as a committee, are we generally in support of, of course, looking at whatever efficiencies we can on our side? Do we want to have options with reserves? We want to look at before doing anything like that. We need to submit. Right. So do you need a number of how much, like what percentage of our reserves or what dollar amount of our reserves? Do you need a recommended number of estimates?
From the conversation here, going back, I would probably, based on what I've heard, Michelle, to say, let's come up with a reserve number that could be replicated and grown at the average growth rate for the next 3 to 5 years. So don't spend so much this year that we can't continue forward next year. That's the model I would use. So
Makes sense.
instead
Is
of,
everyone?
was that
That makes sense, but I would say 5 years based on what we talked about tonight. The horizon looks like.
I was hoping to get 2 years out of it.
I was going to say, the longer the years, the more.
I get it, but I just don't understand 2 year. We only plan to get 2 years out of it.
So
I like 5.
I like 5 too, but if we're gonna go that route and we're gonna trigger a correction from the towns, why not just go for a correction?
Because the timing is bad and there's not a lot of.
Either
Which
option.
brings us to the discussion that we are going to start at 8 o'clock. That includes our goals, the first of which is collaboration conference. The chairs are meeting. That I can say, but it's a chairs meeting where they share, this is what's on our agenda, this is what's on the horizon. These are the topics that we're taking on.
Are the finance committee chairs joining that or just the
board of selectmen.
I think that might be a nice first step.
But my understanding is that's not strategy. Right, that's not. It can't be deliberation, right? So it's not deliberating strategy on how to address these issues. Is that a fair assumption?
Why can't you propose? It's not an open.
It's not an open meeting.
Starting the committee
Right.
members.
Friendly conversation
Right.
between people.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with updating each other.
Yeah, that's all.
But that doesn't address the need to strategize and plan.
So is there appetite then for having our chair and vice chair send out an invitation once more to reconvene in an open format?
I'm happy to. I think that we absolutely need more information and we can't pursue a long-term plan without the town's involvement.
Then the question is it chair and vice chair, or is it finance committee? And I know in the past, that's kind of been one of the same. It's not the case now. But I'll tell you, I personally was interested in the finance committee because that was one of the roles that was being played.
I personally think that right now, the joint building council is working great with building downs. It would be great if the some part of school committee, I think it makes sense for the central finance committee to join the joint building. Because it all comes down to numbers. They have different scenarios to begin with, but
How often are there joint FinCom meetings? I think there was one,
Two.
two.
But that's their entire boards.
Right.
So if we're gonna replicate that, I'd like to invite our entire school committee to join that meeting. Because I would much rather see the configuration that it had been. I'm personally in favor of chair and vice chair. That's was my understanding of how it had started, and then the chair and vice chair were graduating. They weren't running for re-election, which is how Matt and I got brought in to become that subcommittee. The chair and vice chair were the subcommittee. So that's my preference because they are the speakers for the committee, and that's my preference. But I'm not going to lose sleep over who actually does it as long as it's an open meeting. But I think it makes sense to have representatives rather than the whole.
Just in the interest of moving this forward, why don't we send the email proposing? I know we've already sent an email. We didn't receive a response.
That was a long time ago.
This summer.
May was the last one. I think.
We're in workshop mode. We have some folks right here in the room. Does it make sense to pivot and get some feedback?
I think where we don't have one of the boards covered, I don't know that that's fair.
Well, Chris, what do you think?
I would just want to be clear in the.
No, so Pam's question was, can we invite our town
Oh,
representatives?
sure.
But you have to be the person who does that.
Yeah, sure. What do I actually do? You guys have it.
We're talking about collaborating with them while they're sitting here, like. Part of me says, why try to replicate something that has just caused so much in agony, like maybe just establish something new? For the purpose of this particular problem, like, I guess I'm having the experience of like, we've got the OPM subgroup to write the thing, and it just like, we're moving through it, people are giving their thing, it's very clear what the mission is. So do we just reset and create something to address this long-term planning? And figure out amongst all the boards how you want to staff?
I guess my question would be, if you're gonna do that, why do just chairs, the co-chairs, why not just do all boards meeting like we've done in the past, where you get everyone at the table, hearing all the same conversation, and everyone gets their say. I mean, it's been, I think, 3 years since we did that.
No, we just did one, remember? And it was everybody had a lot to say. You probably blocked it out. Was I?
Public meeting.
No, you were both definitely there. It wasn't 3 years ago, but it wasn't just now. It was
Last year.
Right, it was
Spring
after
before
the
last.
over. And it was
Fall of last year.
over a year ago.
I'm just throwing an idea out there, but I'm open to whatever you all need to do to feel like you can communicate with each other.
I may ask the question to you. What do you think the outcome of that meeting was? For me, I feel like the school committee didn't hear the same thing that the board of selectmen and finance committees heard, so I don't know that we want to resolve the same thing. And I think we disagreed on the takeaway. I think that four boards and committees heard operational review, and the school committee didn't hear that, so I'm not sure that we actually solved any problems. I think that was the one point.
We're doing our operational review 2 weeks from now.
Right. 2.5 years later, we're solving a problem that. I myself am very much in favor of having everybody in the room at a table, hashing it out. problem that we face with the open meeting law and having everyone there is that you can't be as open with the things that you may want to say because you're recorded and members of the public. So I know you're shaking your head, but in collaboration, there's been plenty of raised voices, things that you wouldn't necessarily say on camera.
And maybe that's okay.
But I feel like that's.
Maybe it's
what
better
people
that
need to
Don't do those things.
know. If tempers are that high about it, I think that that sentiment is something that everybody needs to understand, see, right? Like, if people are that passionate about it, then show us the passion so that we can pass the message along.
So we can solve the problem.
Yes.
I think the all boards meeting, although I think it has merit, I don't think that it has enough purpose to cross anybody over the finish line. I feel like our joint FinCom meetings need to stay joint FinCom meetings because we are understanding each other as towns and our different perspectives. And I think that Manchester's learned a lot about Essex that they didn't understand before. Like, we have a call fire department. Because they asked me, how did we get so many call firefighters? You know, because they're having trouble getting them. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? And they said, well, you have so many. And I'm like, no, those are all the firefighters. We don't have a 17-person staff of firefighters. We have call people. And so that was a realization to them that Manchester thought that Essex was very similar to Manchester, and we needed to learn that about each other. So I think those meetings are different, and I'm sorry that the collaboration got blown up, because I think we should have left it the way it was. And it had been going on for a period of time without any legal repercussions. And I think that some people need to raise their voices to be heard and allow things to bubble over, because at the end of the day, there is a finite amount of money. We have one town with a huge amount of excess capacity. We have Essex with zero excess capacity. And somehow we have to communicate to the school committee. And I think we have, but it's not palatable, right? Nobody likes to hear this is all of our capacity to share between the school and the town. And I know you think that you should deliver us a budget and then it's our problem to fund it. But actually, I think that the finance committees feel a little bit differently, and that it is your job to, if you need more than that, to sell it to your community. Because at the end of the day, all we do is put it on warrant for town meeting, and your voters are the ones who are going to vote to put that on a ballot. And then the people who go and vote are yet a different subset of the people who go to town meeting.
Well, we don't decide if we go for an override, though.
But you do.
No. We pass on,
But I'm
and
saying,
I'm also
you're
not saying,
determining your budget in excess of what the towns have to spend is a conscious decision to go into override.
but we design a budget that's in excess of what
That's
we're able to spend, and we draw out of the reserves to fund, it, right? The budget is such that we can't afford it within 2.5% either, which is why we are drawing out of our reserves. So I think that the question is, if it comes in and it is more than 2.5%, then we are expecting, or we are assuming that there would be a conversation about whether or not the town would be using any reserves to put towards that assessment.
So when you say your reserves, your right, is your reserves are really our taxpayers' money for both towns. So the reserves for the school are really the taxpayers' money. So you're really using the money that they've already been taxed to reduce an additional debt as an override. So it's a catch-22.
at some point,
And the same with towns reserves. Absolutely. All of the money came from
That's right.
taxpayers, the town and the district.
so it's a cyclical problem, I guess is what I'm saying. And I agree with you, Kate, that I think we have Essex Elementary before us. And I think if we have any chance to get that project over the finish line, which again, I will say is the final pillar of regionalization. And Essex has been waiting for 24 years. If we try to go for an override before that, I think it's going to be problematic. It's going to be very challenging to do an operational override and follow that up with a capital project. And I think that Essex voters have been waiting for that capital project. And if that capital project doesn't pass, then we have a different problem, right? Then we have repairs at Essex Elementary with no state funding.
Well, I think
And no reserves left.
So, okay.
the question was, should we meet as a big group or?
Yeah, so the whole point was asking if we should, we're going far beyond that, so I don't think that's.
I think we had a couple of questions. One was, should we have a meeting where we have all of both finance committees and all of the school committee? And my feeling is that not much got conveyed at the last one. And it's kind of a hassle to get everybody together, and let's see what we can do. I think getting finance people together, perhaps with finance people or some representatives of the school committee, just so that you have a voice. And whether that finance committees and I think the finance committee and the whole school committee is going to be an awful lot of voice. I agree. But maybe representatives of the school committee and finance, joint finance. Would bring another perspective. But each finance committee has a very distinct idea of where the money comes from and where it ought to go. And you should have a voice there.
So you can say just the joint FinCom with school committee representation, keep board select out of it.
For that one, yeah. And
So
that,
it's hard for me to understand, it's hard for me to support a school district having to say how the town's finance committees do jobs. and budgets.
Maybe not say first, I think maybe what
what
I'm
I'm saying is that what two finance committees came together, they learned about each other's problems. You people have a finance problem. You should have a voice in that discussion.
I think that the piece that's missing though is the plan, right? So when Jody just shared information that would be tremendously helpful. And I know that you were sharing it as a person, not as a representative of the finance committee. But if the finance committee were to tell the school committee that they were not going to support an override until after the EES vote, that is vital information for us to have in our planning.
Well, wouldn't we also want board select meeting to put on?
Yes, absolutely.
I think we would do that perhaps separately. Get the finance committees and the school's finance to come up together with an understanding, and perhaps they offer a suggestion, and then we get the select boards.
sure,
To chew on.
because there are advisory board for any sort of fiduciary, recommendations.
And I think in the past, what traditionally happened in Essex was that representatives or the chair or whatever, whoever the representative was to come to the FinCom, would come to the FinCom members and say, meetings and say, so what are we looking at for a number? What's the levy limit? What do you think you're going to be able to fit in the budget? And they would retrofit with that. Because in Essex, it's much tighter. And with the apportionment shift, it became untenable, right? We are just getting slammed every single year. And the pot isn't getting any bigger. And we've been squeezing our
Your
time.
pot is getting bigger because you're building a bunch of stuff.
Well, We haven't built anything yet.
But
What have we built? What have we built?
no, I'm saying you've got two building projects that are causing concern for the school population. So that's,
Sorry. Right. It's just,
Wouldn't this be a
in
great
in the
conversation?
in the
like
interest of our time,
right, yes.
I'm just gonna say, Chris, maybe you and I should get together and reach out to our town partners to coordinate some planning and agree on the format that would take. Because we still have two more things that we need to do tonight, and we have what do we time?
4 minutes.
Sure.
I would just
You
like
look
to add.
just like my husband
appreciate
does
being
when I-
included, right, your representation, so we appreciate being included, and I think that having further conversations is going to be beneficial.
I think it's the only way to move the needle forward. Whatever forward looks like.
Sure.
Okay, so our first, sorry,
One meeting. All right, so the last thing on my agenda was simply,
Supposed to do charges to the school.
yeah, charges with school committee subcommittees, right? I didn't know we were bringing up draft goals tonight.
no, our goals are not drafts anymore. We've already approved them, and
Okay.
one of them is time bound to March 2025.
Okay, but that wasn't on the agenda, so which one and what were we?
No, it's part of subcommittee collaborations.
Oh, okay. So I missed, why don't you go ahead?
So our first goal is the school committee will continue to provide opportunities for open collaboration with town partners to pass a responsible budget and increase awareness of and support for the EES building project. So we just,
Took a major step forward on that goal.
yes, so
Okay,
hope, and I think we will pursue that.
yes,
The second goal is the school committee will collaborate on the development of a budget narrative that describes how key budget elements impact and connect to the district's educational program and strategic goals to be drafted in time for March 2025.
so
Say that again. Or is it in this packet?
that's not the packet, but
I sent it out also.
we were just, that's what we did for the past hour, right?
I just, you read it quickly. Could you just say?
Collaborate on the development of a budget narrative that describes how key budget elements impact and connect to the district's educational program and strategic goals to be drafted in time for March 2025. I agree. We just talked about a lot of that, but it needs to be drafted at some point.
Okay. And then what else?
Our last goal is the school committee will gather input from community staff and students to inform the development of a definition and metrics of academic excellence.
So do we want to talk about subcommittee charges first? And then I suppose we can finish up with discussing it. Do we want to discuss a budget narrative tonight? Do we have a?
No, I thought, I was under the impression that the subcommittee charges were which subcommittees are going to work towards our goals.
So what aid do we want? Do we want to vote to see if we're going to continue, or do we want to?
Yes.
Vote?
Make a motion.
Yeah.
Sure. So I'll take a quick straw poll. Do we want to continue and extend our meeting tonight? All those in favor?
I mean, the ones that I think I actually have to leave. So, right?
I leave it.
Teresa is
I have to leave
my
it.
bride.
Which is now.
I would say that these two things could be very quick, though, if we just
I agree. If you want to do
determine
it quickly,
which
do it.
subcommittees are going to do. I think that the budget narrative should go to the finance subcommittee.
So just a point of clarification is probably my misunderstanding, but I had sent a link to, we don't currently have a basic definition of what the subcommittees do.
And that's what I
I
thought
thought-
the conversation was
That's what
about.
I thought it's how they now they receive their,
Right.
this is one way to do it. The committee votes to assign them this goal. That works. But I think there's just still some desire for clarity around what their actual function is on a regular basis.
Charge.
Can we charge the policy committee with developing that document? Which
Or
document?
coming up with some proposal at least.
See, I think that's the problem, and I'm gonna be frank, which is the subcommittees aren't supposed to decide what the subcommittees do. The school committee at large is supposed to create working groups. The chair is supposed to appoint people to the working groups, we vote. But then the committee is supposed to define the work of the group and give them jobs and responsibilities. So do you want your policy subcommittee? And I'm not gonna. I just send Triton as an example of something that was short and sweet to the point, but it lives as a big reading document. It's clear, we can understand it, people will know what they're looking for.
So have we been doing, like, so as issues arise,
Yeah.
for instance, reserve policy, we allocate it to the policy subcommittee. As the budget narrative topic arises, we vote to allocate it to the finance subcommittee. I mean, I'm probably missing some nuance here, but why that doesn't work?
That has worked, and I think part of the question happened really after our shift in the subcommittees last June, after our reorganization. We all had different new roles.
Not
And also,
everybody, not everybody.
not everybody, I know, not everybody. But also as new people come on, also as new people come on, or as we added to the policy subcommittee and changed it from communication and policy to now it's policy and program and that sort of thing. So I think there's value in having a little definition of what's there, but I don't think we can cover it tonight.
I can have a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All those in favor?
Second.
Thank you.